September 1598, El Escorial, Spain. The hushed corridors of the somber palace were filled with the muted whispers of physicians, and the occasional, agonizing moan emanating from the royal chamber. Inside, upon a deteriorating bed, lay Philip, too, the most powerful monarch of his time. His once formidable body was now ravaged by excruciating pain. His hands, grotesquely deformed by gout, resembled useless, twisted claws. His legs, swollen with edema, had not supported him for weeks, rendering him utterly immobile. The putrid odor of decaying flesh emanating from his decomposing tissues was so intense that even his most dedicated servants recoiled, covering their noses upon entering the room. This was no common criminal paying for his sins, nor a pauper denied medical care. This was the King of Spain, Portugal, Naples, and Sicily, Duke of Milan, and master of the vast territories of the New World, lord of an empire where the sun literally never set. The man who had dared to challenge Elizabeth I of England, who had commissioned the magnificent monastery of El Escorial, and who had spearheaded the fight against the Protestant Reformation, was now succumbing to a slow, excruciating death, abandoned by his own body. How did the world's most powerful king meet such a tragic and repugnant end? To comprehend the horror of Philip II's final days, we must journey back in time and meet the man behind the crown. Born on May 21, 1527, in Valladolid, Philip was the son of Emperor Charles V and the Portuguese Princess Isabella. From an early age, he was meticulously groomed to govern the immense empire his father had painstakingly built. Unlike Charles, who was a warrior by nature and often traveled throughout his vast domains, Philip proved to be a meticulous bureaucrat and administrator, obsessed with the minutiae of governance. He earned the moniker El Rey Prudent, the prudent king, but also El Rey de Papeles, the king of papers, due to his unparalleled dedication to documents and writing. He spent countless hours in his study, poring over dispatches, reports, and petitions, meticulously annotating every aspect of his empire's administration. His fastidious attention to detail was legendary. He often personally reviewed hundreds of documents a day, an almost superhuman feat of administration for his era. When Charles V famously abdicated in 1556, dividing his vast inheritance, Philip inherited the Spanish throne and much of the vast Habsburg Empire, including the Low Countries, parts of Italy, and the burgeoning American colonies. His dominion expanded further in 1580 during the Portuguese succession crisis. Following King Sebastian's disappearance at the Battle of Alcácer, Philip, as the grandson of Manuel I, asserted his claim to the Portuguese throne. Army led by the formidable Duke of Alba, he swiftly defeated the forces of Dom Antonio, Prior of Crato, and was crowned Philip I of Portugal. This act united the two greatest global maritime powers under his single crown, creating an unprecedented empire. Philip was a complex man, profoundly religious and a fervent defender of Catholicism. He truly believed himself to be God's armed hand on earth, tasked with protecting the true faith against all heresy. Under his command, the infamous Spanish Inquisition reached its zenith, relentlessly persecuting those deemed heretics and infidels, often through public autodafs that served as both religious ceremony and terrifying public spectacle. Yet, paradoxically, he was also a significant patron of the arts, a refined collector, and a visionary builder. He amassed an impressive collection of paintings, tapestries, and artifacts from across Europe, and his court was a magnet for leading artists of the day. His most enduring architectural legacy, the royal monastery of San Lorenzo de El Escorial, masterfully combined a palace, monastery, and mausoleum. This monumental structure, often seen as a reflection of Philip's solemn and austere character, stood as a perfect symbol for a king who viewed his earthly power as a direct extension of divine will. In his personal life, Philip married 4 times, in his relentless quest for a male heir to secure his dynasty, a critical responsibility for any monarch. His first wife, Maria Manuela of Portugal, died giving birth to Prince Carlos, a troubled and unpredictable young man who would later be imprisoned by his own father for insubordination and suspected treason, ultimately dying under mysterious circumstances in captivity. His second wife, Mary Tudor of England, notoriously known as Bloody Mary for her fervent attempts to restore Catholicism in England, also died without providing him with heirs. The third, Elizabeth of Valois, a French princess, bore him 2 daughters, Isabella Clara Eugenia and Catherine Michelle, before tragically dying in childbirth. His fourth and final wife, Anna of Austria, who was also his niece, finally gave him his long-desired male heir, the future Philip III, along with other children, though only 5 of his many offspring survived infancy, a stark reminder of the high child mortality rates of the era. Despite the almost absolute power he wielded, Philip II was never a truly healthy man. From his youth, he suffered from recurrent and agonizing attacks of gout, a painful inflammatory disease caused by an excess of uric acid crystallizing in the joints. Gout was notoriously dubbed the disease of kings because it primarily afflicted the wealthy aristocracy who indulged in diets rich in red meat and wine, a lifestyle that perfectly matched Philip's. As the years wore on, his gout attacks became increasingly frequent, excruciatingly severe, often leaving him bedridden for weeks at a time. By 1590, at the age of 63, the king's health began to deteriorate significantly beyond just gout. He started suffering from tertian fevers, fever spikes occurring every 3 days, a classic symptom of malaria, a common ailment in even the most affluent areas of Europe. He also developed severe edema, a debilitating accumulation of fluid that caused his legs to swell to the point of being unrecognizable, making even the slightest movement an ordeal. The relentless combination of these diseases gradually immobilized him. The man once known as the prudent king was now a prisoner within his own failing body. The last 2 years of Philip II's life were a true calvary. Around 1596, his gout deformed. Hands could barely hold a pen, making writing an impossible task. For a man who had built his identity as a meticulous administrator and bureaucrat, this loss of function was devastating. Imagine having the world at your fingertips, only to find your own fingers betraying you. His body, which had never been particularly robust, began to systematically fail him. The king, who commanded half the world, now struggled to control his most basic bodily functions. Struggling with YouTube recommendations. Don't let history's best stories, like Philip II's, slip away. Hit that subscribe button. It's more effective than any royal physician. In July 1598, Philip's condition worsened dramatically. The edema had spread throughout his entire body, causing excruciating, relentless pain. Gout attacked not only his hands and feet, but also his knees, elbows, and even his spine. The royal physicians, utterly powerless in the face of such suffering, resorted to archaic and ultimately detrimental treatments like bloodletting and purges, which only further weakened the dying monarch. The fevers raged, and Philip alternated between periods of feverish delirium and agonizing lucidity. It was during this period that his situation reached the absolute height of horror. Permanently confined to his bed, the king developed deep, festering bed sores that quickly became severely infected. The open wounds on his back, buttocks, and legs became breeding grounds for bacterial infection, attracting insects and creating an environment ripe for the proliferation of parasites. Reports indicate that his mattress had to be perforated to allow the king's bodily fluids to drain, as moving him would have been impossible due to the excruciating pain. As if this unbearable torment were not enough, the monarch's weakened and immobile body became host to a massive infestation of lice and other vermin. The king himself, in one of his last moments of agonizing clarity, is said to have commented with a bitter irony, "See how this body that commanded half the world now cannot even command its own parasites." The closest courtiers bore witness to the grim reality. The great Philip II was quite literally being devoured alive, unable to defend himself even against the smallest creatures. The horror of this situation was not merely physical. For a deeply religious man like Philip, the profound degradation of his body also represented an immense spiritual trial. Several accounts indicate that in his moments of lucidity, the king viewed his intense suffering as an anticipated purgatory, an expiration of his sins even before death. One of the clerics who attended him in his final days wrote that His Majesty endured the pain with such patience and Christian devotion that he seemed more like a saint under trial than a dying monarch. At dawn on September 13, 1598, after 52 days of uninterrupted agony, Philip II finally met his end. His last moments were a poignant mixture of feverish delirium and extreme religious devotion. With a crucifix clutched tightly in his deformed hands, he murmured his final words, a prayer, perhaps, or a plea for forgiveness. No one knows for certain. What is known is that when death finally took him, his face transfigured by pain, seemed to visibly relax, as if finding at last the relief that the medicine of his time could not provide. The king's body, that tortured shell that had once housed one of Europe's most powerful minds, was quickly prepared for the burial. The embalmers worked with immense difficulty, desperately trying to restore some semblance of dignity to what had become, in the last weeks, something almost inhuman. The corpse was then transported to the royal crypt of the El Escorial Monastery, that same majestic building Philip had ordered built as the ultimate symbol of his power and faith, a fitting eternal resting place for such a monumental figure. The death of Philip II closed a truly fascinating and contradictory chapter in European history. The king who had dedicated his life to expanding and preserving Catholicism, who had dispatched the ill-fated Spanish Armada against England, who had brutally suppressed revolts in the Netherlands, and who had unified Portugal and Spain under his rule, ended his days in a state of degradation that profoundly shocked even his most fervent admirers. There is a powerful, almost poetic lesson in how Philip II and starkly contrasts with his life. During his extraordinary reign, he tirelessly attempted to control everything: politics, religion, culture, the seas, distant territories. He constructed a bureaucratic system so meticulous and detailed that it seemed nothing could escape his knowledge or command, and yet, in the end, he could not control even the most basic functions of his own body. The man who considered himself God's instrument on earth became a vivid, poignant example of human fragility. Historians today continue to debate the full extent to which Philip's prolonged illness affected political decisions in the final years of his reign. Some argue that his debilitated state of health forced him to rely more heavily on advisors, many of whom lacked his strategic vision, thereby contributing to the military and economic setbacks that Spain began to suffer in the early 17th century. Others suggest that the profound experience of physical suffering may have tempered his renowned obstinacy, perhaps making him more inclined to seek peace, as evidenced in some treaties signed during his final years, such as the Treaty of Vervins with France in 1598, just months before his death. What is not debated, however, is the profound symbolic impact of Philip II's death. For an era in which the king's body represented the very body of the state, seeing the most powerful monarch of Christendom reduced to a helpless invalid, literally consumed by disease and parasites, was a shattering blow to the period's perceptions of power, divinity, and the divine right of kings. If the king, anointed by God, could suffer in such a terrible and humiliating way, what did this say about the divine order that supposedly governed the world? Philip's son, who would become Philip III of Spain and Philip II of Portugal, inherited an empire still vast, but already showing the first subtle signs of the long decline that would tragically mark the following century for Spain. Unlike his meticulous father, Philip III was not a hands-on administrator, delegating much of the government to powerful favorites like the Duke of Lerma. Perhaps horrified by the agonizing end he had witnessed, the new king seemed more interested in enjoying life's pleasures than in consuming himself in the relentless bureaucratic work that had, in a sense, slowly killed his father. The death of Philip II remains a potent reminder that, in the end, not even the most powerful monarchs can escape the fundamental human condition. The king who ruled an empire where the sun never set ultimately experienced a long, painful, and deeply degrading personal sunset. His horrific end stands as a powerful memento mori, a grim but essential reminder of mortality that, sooner or later, makes us all equal, whether kings or beggars. The story of the powerful monarch who died in agony, slowly consumed by disease and parasites, is more than a macabre tale to satisfy morbid curiosities. It is a vivid reminder that behind crowns, scepters, and royal mantles exist fragile and fallible human beings, and however great earthly power may be, there are fundamental limits that no royal decree can ever overcome. Want more compelling stories from history's most powerful and fragile figures? Subscribe now.